Thank you, Amy, for joining us, and thank you all again for staying so diligent and being in our room today. We appreciate it. We're going to hear from the lovely Amy Schmitz Weiss. She's a professor in the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego University. She teaches journalism courses in basic writing and editing, multimedia, web design, data journalism, mobile journalism, sensor journalism, media entrepreneurship, and spatial journalism. I'm just exhausted saying all of that. She's a recipient of the 2017-2018 San Diego State University grant program. Her project entails examining the intersection of journalism, social media, and location-based services in today's digital mobile environment. She was the 2014-2015 recipient of the Challenge Fund for Innovation in Journalism Education by the Online News Association. Her research interests include online journalism, media sociology, news production, multimedia journalism, and international communication. She has published her research in several peer-reviewed articles, chapters, and co-edited a book on a variety of topics related to journalism. Welcome, Amy. So glad to have you. I'm going to ask all of you, please, I will be moderating this room. So if you could put your questions as she talks into the chat or raise your hand when we get to Q&A and take it.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm a very busy person, I guess. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Gary, Pam, Allison, Brant, and everyone who's tied to this conference. It's an amazing conference. Just today and yesterday have been great in terms of just hearing from such a great group of folks in terms of what's happening in mobile. And thank you for all your hard work in making this happen in these virtual times for us to get together. And I look forward to next year's, hopefully in person, so we can all be together. So today I wanted to talk with you about the realm of geolocation and the media, from challenges to opportunities and beyond. And, this is an area that I have spent a lot of time in. So I wanted to share with you some insights that I have come to see over the years, as well as looking at what's going to be coming up in the future as well. And so before I start talking about specifics, I just want to tell you a little bit about me. Some of you may or may not know, but I've been in this industry since the 1990s. I was doing the HTML, CSS coding back in the day at the Chicago Tribune Online. So I've seen the evolution of how digital has transformed in these years, and it's been amazing to see how quickly it has progressed. Specifically in this time frame, I was in the industry, and then I went on and did my PhD. Looking at examining, how digital technologies and innovations are happening in this space and how it impacts what journalists do in the newsroom, and exactly, how it helps or hinders their work. That's been at the basis of everything I've done over the years, and bringing that into the classroom as well. And as part of this ride, I've had the opportunity to participate in a variety of different technological innovations, both in the community and on the campus, specifically tied to mobile, helping build a mobile news app for our students on campus, to deploying a sensor journalism project that had an impact on the community with air quality. And at the heart of all of this, it's been always tied to looking at digital technology and location. Spaces and places are so important around us on a daily basis that we sometimes take it for granted. And so back in 2014, 2015, I developed this concept and theoretical framework called spatial journalism, which basically looks at the intersection between journalism, spatiality, location-based services, and mobile technologies. And it looks at it from the sense of the actual physical location, virtual as well as augmented. And so in these 5-6 years since that has been developed, it's been really cool to see how things have evolved in that space. And so what I bring to you today is some insight and research that I've been doing in this area over the years that has looked at how much we can see the potential opportunities, as well as the challenges with geolocation and location-based services in these moments within journalism in particular. So let me throw a few questions at you here. Before I throw the few questions at you, I'm going to define a question for you. So what is geolocation? So for those of you in this room may not know, geolocation basically is identifying one's location in reference to a specific data point or information. At its most basic level, you can think about this in terms of a map. If you're going from point A to point B and you plot it in Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever map service on your phone, you figure out this is where I am and this is where I need to go. And geolocation has that ability to pinpoint where you are in reference to where you want to be at its most basic level. Again, we take it for granted nowadays with it being so easy to use our mobile phones to identify where we need to go through this use of geolocation. So let me ask you those questions I was going to ask you. So I want you to think about this. In the past week, have you looked up a restaurant that is near you to order food or to check it out in case you want to visit it? Here. Have you used digital maps on your phone to navigate to somewhere in the past week? Have you looked up the latest COVID-19 data in your immediate area, whether that's vaccinations or infection rate at this point, hospitalizations or deaths? Have you looked up a service near you for help in some capacity? If you answered yes to any of these, you have most likely used location-based services and tied into that possible geolocation services. Again, we may not think much about it because it happens on the back end of the mobile device. We've become so connected to our mobile devices, and these location-based services have become so ubiquitous and hidden that we just take it for granted. But they are there, they exist, and we're actually using them more and more on a daily basis in that regard. So the location-based services industry is a very robust industry that is quickly growing and evolving. According to a recent market report, the location-based services industry stood at $17.8 billion last year in the US. And it is now forecasted that it's going to be at $39.2 billion in the US by 2025. That's only a few more years from now, which again demonstrates how much resources, investment, people, time is being poured into this and how it is going to continue to grow. A big part of this is 5G, of course, is helping to spur this growth. Satellite technology, as well as remote sensing, is also contributing in these moments as well. Indoor and outdoor proximity services are also gaining traction, where we no longer find that location-based services are only outside when you're moving from one place to another, but they're also growing inside in terms of going through malls or even airports to locate one to whatever services that they might need. Within the space, particularly since the pandemic has happened, healthcare and life sciences have also spurred this growth and will continue to do so as well, specifically in the areas of equipment and patient tracking. There's a lot that's being invested now to look at how smart healthcare equipment and wearables can be used to help track one and what they're doing. And with the pandemic happening, it has really identified new opportunities in this space. With all of this said, the data and analytics that is being gained in these moments from location-based services is really helping to drive location intelligence and creating a very robust field in which people are gaining a lot of information and knowledge about what people are doing, how they're going about doing it in the location that they're in that moment in time. So with all of that said, how does this really impact society, right? What does all of this mean? Well, there's a connection here that is twofold. One, it can help to locate a person to information or services nearby, which can be a very much of a benefit in a lot of different circumstances and situations. However, at the same time, it can also help to identify or track a person's location to something nearby with or without their knowledge, which brings up the opportunity as well as the challenges in these moments with geolocation. So I wanted to bring up a couple of examples to you that maybe you're familiar with, or maybe you're not, that can kind of delve a little bit deeper into this. A few years ago, Strava, which is a fitness tracking app, allows one to go in and show exactly the paths that they're taking for their exercise and share it with others in their network. And fitness trackers have become very popular. They also have location-based tracking within them, so you can share where you're going and how you're going about your exercise regimen. Well, it turned out that Strava was actually showing and revealing military bases and patrol routes of the military in its app among its military users who were going into the system, which created a lot of complications with the US military and the government in terms of what this location tracking data was able to show and how people in the public could be able to access this. Also in 2018, MoviePass was under fire because they were able to show that they were tracking one's location even before they would go to a movie theater or after a movie theater. MoviePass was one of those apps where you could go in and sign up for a series of movies for a given fee, and then you could check out as many movies as you wanted at the theater. So they came under fire because of the location tracking that they had enabled in their app without giving users proper opt-in options, but also how they were tracking the location of users when they weren't actually at the theater. Again, poses some concerns and questions. In 2019, the New York Times developed this robust investigation that was quite powerful at the time that analyzed 50 billion location pings from over 12 million Americans from 2016 to 2017. They had accessed the information from a location data company that had given it to them. And in this powerful piece, One Nation Track, they were able to show exactly how they could dive in to a specific individual and see their location patterns in a given time period, where they went to go grab a coffee, where they went to go drop off their kid for school, when they picked up their kid from school, and where and how they went home to have dinner. So all of these aspects tie back into how geolocation has been in the news and has come under fire as well in terms of the potential issues that are tied to tracking one's location. One of the most recent ones that has come up in this space as well is going back to January 6th, in which a Wired investigation actually identified that the FBI was able to get Geofence search warrants to identify the location of people in a certain area near the Capitol during the January 6th riot, which helped them in terms of moving forward in their investigation as a result of getting this Geofence information from Google. So all of these examples highlight new levels of vulnerability that raises potential opportunities for identity theft, stalking, and other forms of misuse of location data. And of course, this is a big challenge. In recent years, there have been specific initiatives and legislation that has come forward in this space, in the bigger picture of looking at the ways in which third-party technology companies access the information of what a user does and exactly how they can opt in and opt out. GDPR, which came out a few years ago in terms of being able to allow for people to opt in and opt out of what exact information is being tracked on them from different variety of digital companies and organizations from Europe as well as North America, and how that has impacts on news organizations today. CCPA, which was passed several years ago, but has come under new guidelines as of this past year, is one of the most robust in the country in terms of giving people the right to delete, the right to opt out and opt in, and the right to know about their personal information that's being tracked about them. In both of these cases, the location data is at the forefront of this as well in terms of what exactly is being tracked and how. Again, with all of this, if one may have the opportunity to know exactly how their location data is being used, and if they want to have it tracked, opt in or opt out, can help in terms of moving the location-based services industry in another level when thinking about the ethical concerns that come up with this. It's very interesting to note that basically one entity right now is really diving into looking at this, and it's coming from the American Geographical Society. They have created this Locus Charter, locus meaning a Latin term for place, in terms of looking at how an ethical guidepost can be created in terms of looking at location data and how it can be used appropriately and ethically. So they launched this back in 2019, 2020. And as you see here, it's under Ethical Geo, which is an initiative as part of the American Geographical Society that have several founding principles, as you see here, 10 of them listed, that look at, the potential implications of what collection of location data can be, and how to think of the user in these moments of when it's being collected and how it's being used. They've actually, over the past year, have gained traction with bringing on several different organizations within the US as well as internationally that are agreeing to this Locus Charter, not just to state that they agree with it, but that they're taking action in their own areas to help implement the protection for this kind of location data and creating the proper guideposts. I think with smart and ethical practices, geolocation and location-based services can really continue. But I do think that there is a moment here in the news industry to really think about this in more detail as to what exactly this means on a greater scale. Now, with all of that said, we can also see that there's opportunity, aside from the challenges that are within location-based services and geolocation. Just to go over a couple of examples, geolocation for news audiences can really help them to connect to places and spaces that are important, and for certain circumstances that could arise. It could provide them information and resources in moments of a disaster. If there's a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, helping them to find the places where they need shelter or food or some other kind of service. It can also provide them with healthcare information, as we have seen during this pandemic. There are little snippets of how we see this geolocation data helping to mobilize communities, neighborhoods, in terms of understanding what the impact of the pandemic is doing in particular. We can also see that geolocation can also help with educational opportunities to provide one with specific information and opportunities for them to gain additional educational workshops, et cetera, that might be happening nearby to them that they otherwise would not be aware of. Of course, one of the obvious ones might be tied to entertainment and food, which we may think of now when we go and check into Yelp to see what place we want to check out for a restaurant, for instance. There's a lot of continual progression in this area of looking at how one can connect them to arts and events, as well as getting information on restaurants nearby. But you can also layer this with additional information, historical or contextual information from the newsroom, as well as additional data, such as food inspection reports that could be overlaid on the information of a restaurant review that could help one to decide, should I check out that restaurant or maybe I shouldn't if the health inspection isn't so good. And then, of course, looking at weather or business events nearby can also help to inform the news audience as to whether they need to change their clothes for the day or prepare accordingly, or to be aware of new businesses in their area that they may want to check out. And of course, the last one being traffic, being able to know exactly how congested or not it will be in a given area. So geolocation has a lot of potential uses in these moments, depending on the circumstance and the place and space in which that audience is. Now, I wanted to share with you today some data and study that I've recently done looking at two particular communities. One is Brooklyn, New York, and one is Austin, and show you some of the information based off of this particular study. It's not a very large sample, so we can't generalize to either community, but it can give us some insights into what may be happening in these spaces that warrant additional research to look at what's happening in both places. It was a research survey that I conducted. It was about 356 participants from both communities, looking at exactly how they seek out geolocated news. So a couple of highlights. One is that people do want to know about places and spaces that are near to them from their mobile device. 84% said that they like to get news about a location that's important to them. Now that location might be something tied to their work or tied to their children's school, or perhaps a particular place they like to frequent. 77% like to get the news proximate to their physical location via their mobile phone. So again, dictating exactly how much the location-based services behavior that has formed and continues to form does create this news behavior of people wanting to get this kind of news and information. Interestingly, in terms of the circumstances, 71% seek news on places where they live, work, or play, 63% where their family or friends live, 63% for personal travel, 48% for places that they travel for business, and 30% where their coworkers live. So not as much with their coworkers. But again, this shows the circumstances in which people are seeking news and information in these moments of work and play. We may tend to think of places and spaces for providing news based off of where one is in terms of their neighborhood or city, but there's a lot of other circumstances that can arise in this context too. Now, it's interesting as well as with this study, I wanted to also find out, well, what else is happening with their interest in getting geolocated news to them? And I wanted to see exactly how much do they have connections of engagement, as well as potential aspects of trust and credibility with the local news media as a result of this. And it was interesting to note that of those who are getting this kind of geolocated news experience, they said that they feel engaged with the local media in their community as a result of this. They also are consuming a lot more local news proximate to their location several times a day. So what does all of this mean? Well, basically, in these two communities, again, it's a small sample, so we can't generalize, but we can see that there are geolocated news experiences that are happening in these two places. And those who are seeking out geolocated news do seek it out several times a day and feel engaged with local news. I think it's an interesting potential point is that these kinds of geolocated news consumers are really a unique group that show their connection, their ongoing engagement with local and proximate news. As the journalism industry is facing a crisis in terms of trust and credibility, as well as in terms of their business model and how to sustain themselves, there really is a crucial opportunity here in terms of looking at this unique group, because it does potentially show that they are committed, loyal, and interested in wanting to know what's happening around them. And for a local news organization, that can be very important in terms of building a long-term ROI that's not based off of money or business, but is based off of location and spaces and places that are important to them. And so looking at this can be another potential insight as to what does geolocation really mean, aside from just connecting a person from one point to another. There are a lot of additional layers that are there. My research is continuing to explore this in deeper levels and looking at the specific circumstances and context by which this is happening. And so hopefully, if I can come back next year for Mobile Me, I can share with you that new information if that's possible at that point. So with all of this, is there money to be made, right? Of course, the money question always comes up with this. And you know what? It can be profitable. Factual is an organization that has been around now since 2018. It was created by the founders of Breaking News, Corey Bergman and his colleagues. That was originally run on their own, and then NBC took them on. NBC decided to close them a few years after because they said they weren't profitable. However, after they were closed down, Corey and several of his colleagues decided to build Factual back in 2018. And their organization is very different. They focus on providing breaking news, geolocated, and focus on businesses that are looking to assess their risks. They also work with a lot of NGOs. Over the past 4 years, they've been continuing to be heads down and focusing on their operations. And as of last year, they were actually able to double their revenue in 2020. And they raised additional money, 3.3 million. So when one says, well, is there potential here for this to be sustainable? It is, but it's a long-term gain. There's a long-term ROI to delving into this that's not instant and doesn't happen overnight, but it can be possible. And if you have a loyal audience, whether it's a news audience or potential B2B customers, there's a lot that can be gained in this space. Now, of course, we are in a moment of a data renaissance for journalism. The pandemic has driven everyone to want to know the latest numbers of what's happening in their community. And as a result, data dashboards have become the primary and most popular part of any news organization's website right now, in many cases. It's the top performing. And it goes to show how much people want to know what's happening around them and in the places where their family and friends live. These data dashboards get back to that aspect of location and locative data. And as a result of this past year, it has set the behavior for people to now seek out this immediate kind of data. It's not going to disappear once the pandemic is over. It's actually going to accelerate, which means that geolocation and locative data is now. And this is the opportunity to really dive deeper into it in different aspects, aside from healthcare, aside from the pandemic, and other particular locative data points. When we think about this, we may think that geolocation is only at the level of a specific zip code or what's proximate to you within a few minutes. However, we can also think about geolocation as the neighborhood. It's a little bit of a wider area, but still has the meaning and context for that news audience. And there's two examples here that I wanted to highlight that have been continuing in this space. One is called The Hook, which was created a few years ago now with the Lenfest Local Lab and the Philadelphia Inquirer, in which they wanted to focus on creating a neighborhood newsletter that would curate the best of the news information they could have on that neighborhood. But not only that, provide events, weather, job opportunities, and other kinds of information in that neighborhood newsletter. News that could be very helpful on a variety of different scales. On the other side, we have what is called Crosstown. This was developed out of LA, and they basically focus on providing neighborhood newsletters that are tied to specific data, for instance, crime, and right now the COVID-19 pandemic. So one can subscribe by their specific neighborhood to get the latest information about everything that may be happening with crime in that particular neighborhood in LA or related to the health pandemic. They're expanding in terms of their data and what they're going to be offering in the future in terms of their newsletter, delving into these additional data points. So when we think about geolocation, it doesn't have to always be exact to that person's proximate area, but we can look at other constructs geographically as well. Now, one part to this as well to bring up is thinking about how much, I've said spaces and places a lot today, but how much there is a lot to be said for truth in location. As journalism, as I have mentioned, is in a moment of crisis in which there is a lot of doubt by the public in terms of what they can and can't trust. Location allows for that opportunity for news organizations to recognize that they can rebuild that trust, gain that trust by looking at this from one particular lens. Certainly, it's not the answer to everything and not the panacea, but it can be one of many aspects. Geospatial technology can really provide truth and location in place if it's used correctly. And if it's used in the appropriate hands and an ethical reporter, it can help to show different information layers that exist in specific locations and the stories that are happening within that particular place. Of course, like I said, geospatial technology won't be the sole answer to this, but it can help move the barometer in a positive direction with the public. This is based off of some research that I'm up in a forthcoming chapter in the geospatial handbook by Routledge. But when we think about this, there is truth in location with the richness of a narrative that only a journalist can provide. A location data point in and of itself can just be a data point, but it takes the journalist to provide the history and the context and the meaning behind that specific location, and to help the public know what's happening around them and make better decisions as they go about their daily life. When we think about this in a different context, we can understand that location sometimes is taken for granted, and we may go past places and spaces without thinking twice about it. But what happens is in these moments, geolocation and locative data can actually make the invisible visible, the hidden apparent, and the abandoned no longer. These are two articles that have recently been published by the Places Journal, which is one place I love to go look at all the time. It's a journal that's created that focuses on folks who are in architecture, urban planning, sociology, and in other areas that are examining exactly spaces and places and what they mean around us. And in these two pieces, they talk about how much this focus of what we tend to bypass perhaps on a daily basis does have meaning and context. During the pandemic, as Shannon Mattern mentions in her piece, during the pandemic, we have come to realize that there are a lot of invisible forces at play that make our cities, towns operate, to keep the lights on, to keep garbage from, keep getting it picked up. And those invisible actors are a crucial part to helping a city move, even those that we may not also know. And so that what is considered invisible or hidden actually is just as important to bring to light. Over here on the other side is Matthew Souls, who did a piece about zombies and ghosts and how there is this overwhelming number of residential buildings in cities that have been created as a result of financial capitalism in these moments that have actually ended up becoming zombie towns and ghost towns where maybe no one lives or only a few people live. And so what happens in those spaces and places where people reside? All of this brings up questions about what is a news organization thinking about in terms of their immediate community? Where are those invisible and hidden and abandoned areas that perhaps locative data, geolocation data can also help to provide some insights as to differences in their news coverage moving forward. I wanted to bring up this example because I think it's one that is important on this pathway. This is an initiative that's being done by the Brown Institute in conjunction with Lenfest Local Lab, where they have been looking at exploring how geotagging news content can help to show potential patterns or trends in given areas. And they've actually been working on this for the past 2 years. They're using natural language processing, deep learning, and geolocation technologies to scan news stories and to help audit what is happening in a given area. They just came out with this piece in September of looking at how this particular effort can provide some information, but it can also show the lack of equity and representation in local news as a result. As it's mentioned in the article from the Brown Institute, they mentioned that it's clear that geography is just one aspect of equity and representation, but for local news in particular, it seemingly sits at the center of cultural norms and biases that have built up in communities and institutions over time. And so taking this look at location in a different way can also help newsrooms to revisit exactly what does that equity and representation mean in terms of news coverage, and how can it be done differently moving forward. So I wanted to leave you with some concluding thoughts that may inspire you or get you thinking. One is that there are lots of opportunity in this moment for the power of looking at location, space, and place with journalism. I think we're really at the beginning stages of this and seeing where it can go. Second, we can start to see that news consumers are seeking geolocated news and information. And when they do get it, they seek it out frequently. This is something that needs to be understood and recognize that there is a potential audience here for this particular kind of experience. However, at the same time, there are challenges that remain. The locative data and how it's used, how it's collected, and by whom for which purpose does come into play in terms of what are the ethical concerns that arise, thinking of transparency and privacy, how one can opt in or opt out of this kind of experience. And what role does journalists play in this? What is their responsibility in reporting on this? So it creates this necessary moment for ethical best practices that are needed for spatial and geo approaches in these moments. Side note, there's something exciting I'm working on in this area, so stay tuned. Maybe I can talk about it next year too at Mobile Me. Again, we can see that this is also a space that can be profitable and sustainable. There's opportunities that one can see if they're in the long game for this. Of course, with all of this too, there is an opportunity to regain trust or gain trust with the news community as a result of looking at things from this geo and spatial lens. The ability to look at how equity and representation can be explored, but also acted upon in the newsroom, and to make the invisible visible. This kind of approach of looking at geolocative news really gives newsrooms and the news industry an opportunity to be proactive versus reactive, to right the wrongs of the past and to change the dominant narrative in journalism. Just because things have always been done the way they have been, news coverage has always been done the way that it always has been, doesn't necessarily reflect the reality of the communities that they serve today. And really, ultimately, this is a new and unexplored frontier for journalism. We need more pioneers to help occupy the space and to push it forward. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing any questions that you may have.
Amy, thank you. That was really a great presentation. Reminder, please, to raise hands, and or you can, if you're shy, I don't know why at this point you would be, please put your questions there in the chat. So Amy, maybe I'll just kick off a little bit. And you've covered a lot in that, and it's just amazing the work that you're doing. What is really, do you think, been kind of a challenge for newsrooms to sort of think, more spatially and kind of get behind this type of journalism?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. It's one of the questions I asked Tony yesterday about mindset, and he was like, I'm not sure either. I mean, I think it comes back to thinking about, how we approach our journalism and what we think about what is news in a community, and really understanding exactly what is happening in that particular neighborhood or sets of neighborhoods, and diving into what does a space and place actually mean. There are these constructs that have been created over the years and myths about what is considered news coverage or a news event that may not necessarily align with what news audiences are seeking out in these moments. And so I think it's having that understanding and building a mindset that thinks not of location just as the where in the lead, but going deeper into that and making location actually first and foremost the part that drives the overall story.
Well, it's interesting because some of the speakers yesterday talked about sort of this place, sense of place and bringing people together. And you're right. I mean, I think it's a really good point when you talk about just location and the where, but building around that. And, with the pandemic and really looking at more of this, how do you sell that to an editor, maybe in smaller newspapers, or, what do you do?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I think, as Dan Pacheco was mentioning this morning, I think it's a matter of just doing and then showing. So if a reporter has an opportunity to tell the narrative in a different way by jumping in and doing a story map, for instance, or perhaps even auditing their own news coverage over a week or two to see exactly where they are spending their time and where they're not, might help the editor to see things in a different light than versus just talking about it, but by actually showing and doing might be one step to kind of get the buy-in to move forward in terms of looking at it.
One thing I keep thinking about, and one story that's always stuck with me, Brant, I don't know if you can tell the story way better than I can, about the map they did way back, was it the 1800s, late 1800s, of either murders or the water system. I'm going to completely botch it, but telling, using kind of location in that case to, plot or fuel the story. And I feel like this is a little bit different, right? I mean, this is just yes, Brant, please jump in and say something.
Oh, no, it was basically the water system in London and finding out where they were having a disease outbreak because of the bad water in the pumps. It was a famous map by John Snow, right, Amy? I believe it was.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask Amy is, and I think you're implying it, but it seems to me that when we think about the geolocations and the stories, that we need to really think about them. This seems obvious coming on the mobile phone first. And I still am finding some people are thinking about how a map first, how a map looks on the website, and then how it looks on the phone, having a responsive kind of system. But isn't this what you're really talking about, is tying all of this into mobile devices, really?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's the platform where everything is happening. And, the ability for one to locate themselves in reference to that information, this device helps to make that possible more than ever.
Yeah.
And how much mobile technology has really pushed that forward more than any other, I think.
Yeah,
But I think, yeah.
I just think we've been digital first for a while. We like that phrase to just keep pounding that nail on the board. But I think if we're going to do something like that now, I think it's mobile first.
Exactly.
And this is going to push us that way even more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other part to it too is it doesn't necessarily have to be a map that one has to experience or navigate. We have different ways in which we organize and navigate our daily lives that may not necessarily tie back to the physical map of what we think. Location-based services oftentimes don't operate off of that way now. If you use like DoorDash or Grubhub or Yelp, you may use the map feature, but oftentimes you're putting yourself in reference to a specific location or space and then getting the information back to you for retrieval. So I think news organizations don't necessarily have to focus on the map being a part of this. It can be helpful, but I think thinking of that in reference to geolocating one or locating one to reference to the information or news is the more important point.
Yeah, I think so too. We're working on a crime map of shootings in this area, and I think people are very concerned about what location they're in at this point. So it'll be interesting how we try to work that with the mobile devices too.
Thank you both. Gary has a question.
Yes, yesterday, Mitra was talking about community level journalism and engagement with the community, and gave some examples of specific examples of helping people get COVID shots, for example. I was thinking, once I heard your talk, Amy, that geolocation would be just a fantastic tool to help, micro level engagement if necessary, or larger community engagement. For instance, we have a big arena in town where they've been giving the COVID shots. So how difficult would it be if the newspaper wanted to geofence that location or a couple blocks around that location and say, hey, walking by here today, COVID shots are, for the next 5 hours. Can an organization or an individual fairly easily geofence information like that, or do you have to go through all sorts of companies and organizations to get it done?
I think it's a combination of both, right? I think in some cases, some of the legacy systems that news organizations are working with don't necessarily speak to the geographical constraints or geographical opportunities that exist. And so getting systems to talk to each other, I think, is part of the challenge in these moments that prevent news organizations from going this route. I think that it can be done outside potentially of the legacy systems. But, I think it's also a question of resources and time and where they think they want to invest, what they think is best in terms of their reporters. So I think it's, as I mentioned before, I think it's a long-term game. I think it's something that should be a devoted effort that's not just a one-off experience in terms of looking at geolocating to these different kinds of circumstances, but looking at it from a variety of different perspectives. And doing it across the board for multiple aspects of news coverage. I think that there could be a lot done in that space. So I think it can be done. And I think some are doing it. You see Factal, for instance, who's been able to dive into this and do it well. And there have been others as well. So, but I think it comes down to resources, right? In some cases, as to how one goes forward with this kind of experience.
Well, would it be expensive? Because I'm thinking that it could also really well be used for advertising, and that would be a way to pay for it. As you know, you can start giving the service to various local advertisers. You're driving by or walking by a store. We've got a sale for the next 5 hours. Come on in. It seems that it could be so profitable to use for local ads that it could pay for local news, is what I'm hoping. Does that sound realistic?
It does, yeah. I mean, you look at location-based services right now and the advertising industry, they are looking at gaining this kind of location intelligence, to knowing exactly what people are looking at and what particular advertisers are catching their eye versus others. The marketing side of this is huge when you look at the next 5 to 10 years and how it can be done. And there's a variety of different ways. It doesn't have to be exact to the user's location, right? When you're dealing with CCPA or GDPR, you could extend the location out a little bit further so that it's not as pinpointed in some cases. But definitely there's a big opportunity to connect that.
Great, thanks.
Well, any last call? We're getting on to the lunch hour soon. So last call for questions, comments, raise your hand, please, or pop in the chat. Meanwhile, just to kind of remind you, we will be resuming here again, looking at my schedule at 12:30. With texting with the audience, which should be wonderful. Amy, this was a stellar presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. Announcing then our Starbucks winner for this session, Bella Burkhead. So please, congratulations, Bella. Good job to you for being number 4 on the random number selector. Amy, as you know, we've been ending every question with a, oh, someone, okay, good. No, I just make sure to last questions. But before I ask mine, just here we go. And those of you who'd like to answer in the chat, please do. Would you rather be serenaded by Justin Bieber or Justin Timberlake?
Could I say
And you
neither?
gotta say one. Let's say you just, everyone's saying neither. Okay, well, not quite.
Good answer.
Let's say though, you had to pick one. You have to pick one because you are the speaker and I'm going to hold you to the rules.
You're going to hold me to the rules. I guess I would pick Timberlake, I guess. Yeah.
He's pretty funny. Someone noted that too.
Yeah.
Well, reminder to everybody, if you want to hang out a little bit more with Amy and if she's willing to stay, then you can do this room. Otherwise, we also do have, for those of you who just want to connect and talk more journalism and mobile and maps, we do have an open room you can go into. We'll take a break. We'll be back here again at 12:30. So enjoy your lunch hour. Amy, can't thank you enough. And by the way, Amy should be like the better engaged speaker because she has been here tirelessly throughout. It's time for lunch, y'all. I'm out of here. Take care. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks, Pam.
Bye.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brant.